Good morning, I'm Joe Fryer.
And I'm Savannah Sellers. Right now on Morning News Now, tragedy in San Jose. 9 people dead after yet another mass shooting in America.
It begs the damn question, what the hell's going on in the United States of America? What the hell's wrong with us?
The latest on the investigation into that rail yard shooting in San Jose and what we're learning about the gunman's troubled past. COVID questions. President Biden now asking U.S. intelligence to redouble its efforts in finding the origin of the coronavirus in response to new reports about that lab in Wuhan, China. The new push to come to a definitive answer. Eye in the sky. Drones join a Southern California police force, prompting privacy concerns as a district attorney in a major city nearby speaks out about his plans to keep people out of jail. A closer look at the possible future of policing in America. And cheap seats. With travel picking up across the country, we'll tell you about not one, but 2 new airlines getting people back to traveling on a budget. This morning, though, we'll get right to that breaking news and begin with another community in mourning after a deadly workplace shooting in San Jose, California.
Law enforcement officials say a public transit employee opened fire on his co-workers at a rail yard, killing 9 people before taking his own life. It happened at a Santa Clara Valley Transportation Authority facility. This tragedy is just the latest in a string of deadly mass shootings across the country.
You know, there's a numbness I imagine some of us are feeling about this, because there's a sameness to this. You know, anywhere USA. It just feels like this happens over and over and over again. Rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat.
MSNBC anchor Lindsay Reiser is on the ground in San Jose. Lindsay, we know 9 people lost their lives. What more can you tell us about those victims?
Well, the scene is still blocked off here this morning, Joe. And as you mentioned, we do have 9 victims. A 9th person actually died overnight in the hospital. And we've learned their names and their ages. And we're going to show those to you now. Their ages range from 29 to 63. Some, if not all, employees here at the VTA. This took place during the shift change. So there were workers from the midnight shift and workers from the day shift who were here at the time. And we still don't know how many people were hurt in this mass shooting. But we did hear overnight from the family members of one of the victims. I want you to hear what they talked about in terms of their mourning process right now. Let's listen.
I listen to the news, then I call and say, oh, Taftaj is missing, because I know he's working here. So I call him, he don't pick up the phone.
And they also tell us that their family member is an employee here and was a hero, made calls to other coworkers, warning them of what was happening, even pushing somebody out of the way. Joe?
We always seem to hear these heroic stories in such devastating situations like this. Lindsay, I do want to ask you about the investigation. What are officials saying about it, and what have they learned about the gunman and a possible motive?
So we know he is 57-year-old Samuel Cassidy. He's a VTA employee. Neighbors call him standoffish. His ex-wife spoke to the Associated Press. They were divorced in 2005, haven't spoken in 13 years, but she describes him as having a bad temper, saying that he's wanted to kill people at work before, but she obviously never thought that he would go through with it. At the same time that the shots fired calls were taking place, there was this call about a 10-minute drive away from the home of Samuel Cassidy, where they believe he set it on fire. They're looking at the possibility that he did so before coming here to work. Again, a 10-minute drive away. And back here at the VTA facility, there were bomb-sniffing dogs who made several hits, and so they sent in a bomb robot. But we are told that none of the devices were found to be explosive, so the building was given the all clear. Now, we're learning more about the heart-stopping moments from the sheriff, who says that shots were still being fired when first responders first came here, when officers and deputies first arrived, and that they were shouting sheriff in the halls to warn him that they were on their way, and that Cassidy ended up turning the gun on himself, and no gunfire was exchanged with deputies. But Joe, we've heard from Governor Gavin Newsom, who was incensed, who said he was determined to make this, not make this meaningless. And we also heard from President Biden, who not only ordered flags to be at half staff, but also is urging Congress to act on gun control legislation. And Joe, we also know that there will be a vigil tonight at San Jose City Hall at 6 p.m. local. Joe?
And Lindsay, you mentioned that fire at what appears to be the suspect's house. I know they're still trying to figure a lot out about that, but where do things stand with that?
So we know that we have a neighbor surveillance video who showed the suspect, Samuel Cassidy, leaving work that day in his uniform, loading into a work truck that day with a black duffel. This is also neighbor video of that fire. We know inside investigators found rounds of ammunition and gas cans, and then the San Jose PD also initiated their bomb squad there as well. So we are still learning more about these two separate investigations. They're still ongoing, of course, and we'll continue to gather more details, Joe.
All right. Lindsay Reiser in San Jose. Lindsay, thank you so much.
As investigators work to understand how and why this happened, the Santa Clara County Sheriff says the situation could have been much worse.
The deputy sheriffs from the sheriff's office, the officers from San Jose Police Department ran into the building while shots were being fired, and I know that it saved many lives.
Let's bring in Cedric Alexander. He was a member of President Obama's task force on 21st century policing and the former public safety director of DeKalb County, Georgia, also a former police chief. Cedric, good morning. It's always great to have your expertise. I wish it wasn't under these circumstances. In just a moment, I'll ask you a little bit about that law enforcement response and sort of what that says about where we're at right now. But first, let's start with the suspected gunman. He's dead. So what will investigators focus on moving forward? And is it possible to identify a motive?
Well, it's going to be interesting as they move forward in this investigation, because here you have a deceased subject in this particular case. But certainly they're going to go back. They're going to look at personnel records. They're going to talk to family, friends, those he worked there in that facility with. And I think even your early reporting there with Lindsay, where she even indicated that he had made some threatening remarks on and around the campus there in which they worked. So there's going to be an overall investigation by all local, state, federal agencies supporting each other and providing a variety of different resources to try to make some determination as to what was the reason and the cause of this shooting to take place. Were there early warnings that could have been attended to, or were they ignored? So I think as time goes on, guys, we're going to get maybe a better picture of what occurred here, particularly the fact that he burned down, or someone burned down, his home. What was that an indication of? What were they trying to cover up there, knowing that in this premeditated event, that police certainly were going to go to his residence. And they'll also talk to neighbors in that community as well.
Now, Cedric, you just mentioned some of those comments that were made that Lindsay referenced as far as potentially identifying a motive here. And this is the deadliest workplace shooting in over a year. Comes about a month after 8 people were killed at a FedEx facility in Indianapolis. What can law enforcement officials do to identify and prevent future shootings of this nature?
Well, number one, I think that's putting a lot on local law enforcement, because oftentimes there are not indicators in which police may be in proximity of having an awareness about. The awareness really comes from those in those workplaces, in those communities, those neighborhoods, those churches, and to be able to pay attention to people's behavior, what they're saying. But I think it's a bigger systemic problem than that. We're really going to have to take a real look at gun control in this country, how we're going to engage that issue, which is very sensitive, very complex, very convoluted. But at the same time, when we continue to see these types of events over and over and over again, that is something larger that is going on in our American society, our communities, our American culture, that we need to address and hopefully get to a point where we can do that.
Yeah. And Cedric, we mentioned before, and we played some sound there about how law enforcement ran in as the shooting was still active. Tell us about how response to active shooter situations has changed over the years.
Well, certainly it has. Anytime police show up to a scene where there's an active shooter, one or more officers, they don't have to wait on everyone to arrive. One or more officers, if shots are being fired, they will enter into a facility and hopefully to distract that shooter towards them, because at least they're able to fight back with the appropriate weaponry, where as opposed to them just continuing to target those that are innocent and those that, of course, have no way of defending themselves. So police are going to respond with a great deal of training, with a great deal of courage and forethought in their training. But here again, unfortunately, we're seeing too many of these incidents too frequently. And someone asked a question on yesterday, well, these events are starting back up now as we come out of COVID. No, this is a continuation of a previous problem.
Cedric Alexander, as always, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
In a landmark climate case, oil giant Shell has been ordered to cut its carbon emissions at a much faster pace. A Dutch court says Shell must reduce its CO2 emissions by 45% by the year 2030. The lawsuit was brought by several environmental groups, including Greenpeace and Friends of the Earth Netherlands. NBC News foreign correspondent Molly Hunter joins us now from London with more on this. So, Molly, tell us more about why this case is getting so much attention and is so significant.
Hey, guys. Good morning. That's right. This is huge news. And lawyers for the more than 17,000 co-plaintiffs successfully argued that Shell has been aware for years, for decades, of the dangerous consequences of high CO2 emissions, and its targets were insufficiently robust. Now, take a listen to what the lead lawyer had to say.
This is a groundbreaking verdict as far as I'm concerned. It's the first time in the world that a large multinational CO2 polluter like Royal Dutch Shell is ordered by the court to do its share in avoiding dangerous climate change. We expect that this will have a ripple effect against other multinational oil and gas companies and coal companies in the world.
Now, the lawyer Roger Cox also said that this is a call to arms for courts all over the world to hold big multinational companies to account. Joe?
So, Molly, how has Shell responded to this ruling, and could this have the ripple effect that we just heard that attorney mention, pave the way for other big oil companies to maybe face similar lawsuits?
Absolutely. He is not the only one saying that this is now a huge precedent. This could push other oil and gas companies to accelerate their shift away from fossil fuels. Now, Shell is appealing. Take a look at their statement, you guys. They wrote, urgent action is needed on climate change, which is why we have accelerated our efforts to become a net zero emissions energy company by 2050. They also added, we are investing billions of dollars in low carbon energy. And then they say, we fully expect to appeal today's disappointing court decision. So we'll certainly stay on that case for you. Joe?
And let's switch gears to another climate case, Molly, this time in Australia. A group of teenagers took on plans to expand a coal mine. Can you walk us through this one?
Yeah, and this is a really exciting day for these 8 teenagers and an octogenarian nun. An unlikely pairing took on Australia's environmental ministry. So they originally wanted an injunction to prevent the expansion of a major coal mine. What the judge actually did, he didn't actually prevent that coal mine expansion. Instead, he said that the environmental minister has a, quote, duty of care to protect young people. Now, some of the quotes from the teenagers, my future and the future of all young people depends on Australia stepping away from fossil fuel projects and joining the world in taking decisive climate action. They say they are absolutely thrilled. Now, unsurprisingly, the mining companies saw it a little bit differently. They said it was a victory that the actual expansion was not prevented. They didn't even mention the headline-grabbing duty of care decision. But the teenagers have said now that this precedent has been set, they are going to be bringing more cases surrounding the duty of care precedent. Guys?
All right. A lot of major climate stories around the world this morning. Molly, thanks so much.
James Bond has a new home. Amazon has closed a blockbuster deal to acquire MGM Studios. NBC News senior business correspondent Stephanie Rule has more on the $8.5 billion acquisition.
Amazon's newest deal is starting off with a bang. Amazon acquiring MGM Studios for $8.5 billion.
Amazon is behind in the video streaming wars. It's trying to play catch up, and it's costing them $9 billion.
The deal gives them access to over 4,000 classic movies, including the James Bond franchise and Oscar winners like Silence of the Lambs and Raging Bull.
There's no way I'm going down. I don't go down for nobody.
Can consumers expect to see a jump in pricing?
I don't think Amazon is going to try to charge you more for Amazon Prime. They just want you spending more time there, whether it's to buy more stuff or to look at stuff.
This acquisition, made in the final months of Jeff Bezos' tenure as CEO, is the company's second largest to date, after the $13.7 billion purchase of Whole Foods in 2017. Bezos today saying it's going to be a lot of fun work, and people who love stories are going to be the big beneficiaries. giving fans hope that reboots and sequels to some of their favorite films could soon be on the way. Stephanie Rule, NBC News, New York.
It's not just consumers and movie enthusiasts talking about the deal. We are already hearing from lawmakers. No doubt there could be antitrust issues around this deal, given the size of Amazon. However, experts we speak to say while it's a massive company, it's still not nearly the biggest in terms of streaming, and it'll likely go through. Joe, Savannah?
All right, let's take a look at what's making news around the world this morning.
Raf Sanchez is with us from London. Hey, Raf.
Savannah, Joe, good morning. Secretary of State Blinken is wrapping up a 3-day trip to the Middle East to try to shore up that ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. He met with Israeli and Palestinian leaders and also traveled to Jordan and Egypt in the hope of building towards a longer-term peace. A powerful cyclone is battering the eastern coast of India, adding to the country's misery amid a major COVID outbreak. Cyclone Yas has wind speeds of nearly 90 miles an hour, and it has been tearing up trees and homes. It's also causing delays to India's badly needed vaccination program. And finally, 3 giant river otter pups have been born in Argentina, delighting conservationists who are trying to save the species. This particular breed was thought to be extinct, but a rewilding program has brought it back from the brink. They're living in the Ibera, one of South America's biggest wetlands. And guys, I didn't know this, but otter babies are called pups. So there you go.
I think I did know that one, but that was still cute.
It's still cute, yeah. We love happy animal stories.
Yes, yes, love it.
All right, thank you,
Keep it cute.
We try.
Not like those mice yesterday.
Let's get a check on your morning news now. Weather?
Which means Bill Cairns joins us now. Hi, Bill. Good morning.
Hey, good morning. Sometimes tornadoes can be absolutely just gorgeous and mesmerizing, especially when they're not doing any damage or hurting anyone. And that was the case yesterday. You got to check this out. This tornado was in West Texas, and just the backdrop with the dark sky behind it, the tornado lifting up the dirt and debris from the farmer's field. Just really, it looks like a CGI thing that was from like a movie set. It's really incredible. Great capture there by Justin Teague, a well-known storm chaser. All right, so let's get into this forecast, guys, because it's very active and there's a lot going on. We've already had some pretty strong thunderstorms in eastern Kansas this morning. I saw a picture, and I put it on my Twitter feed, of a 4-inch hailstone that fell out of a storm. That's pretty rare. It doesn't happen that often. That's huge. That's like a softball in your hand. So as far as today goes, we are watching Oklahoma, North Texas, areas of Missouri, and in areas of Arkansas. Those are the areas of concern for today, even a little bit of Illinois. We're going to see isolated tornadoes. We're going to get huge hail again today, and watch out for the damaging wind threat. And as far as the forecast goes in the Northeast, we're good today, but then here's what happens on Friday. That rain will wake up, soaking rain in the Ohio Valley. It moves to the Northeast Friday evening. If you have travel on the roads or plans in the air, airport delays are possible. And then it kind of lingers a little bit for an ugly Saturday for on the eastern seaboard. Middle of the country looks just fine, but then a new storm comes on Sunday. And if you want one nice day for the beach, the pool, outdoors, it is Monday for the eastern half of the country. So a lot to digest there as we head into the holiday weekend.
Yeah, and wow, those images were amazing of that tornado. All right, Bill, thanks so much. See you in a little bit.
Okay.
And millions of Americans are getting ready, some to jet off for Memorial Day weekend.
And for some, they can get their shot while they're at it. A look at airport pop-up vaccination sites next.
Intelligence community to step up its efforts to figure out the origins of COVID-19. This comes after a newly obtained intelligence report raised questions about whether the virus escaped from a lab in Wuhan, China, despite an investigation from the World Health Organization in China saying otherwise. The other main theory is that the virus came from human contact with an infected animal. Let's bring in NBCNews.com senior White House correspondent, reporter Shannon Pettypiece, and NBC News correspondent Janice Mackey-Freyer in Beijing, China. Shannon, we'll start with you. So earlier this year, U.S. intelligence officials told NBC News they had not ruled out a lab accident as a cause for the pandemic. Facebook now says it will no longer take down posts that question if COVID-19 was man-made. A reminder that we need answers to counter disinformation that can spread so rapidly. So tell us right now, what does the president want to see from the intelligence community?
The president is saying that he doesn't have any definitive conclusion right now, and he wants them to try and get closer to that with this review over the next 90 days. It's unclear what more they're going to be able to find out, because, of course, we know the Chinese have not been cooperative, and international investigators were locked out in the early days of this pandemic when a lot of those answers could have been more easily deciphered and gotten to. I think, though, the statement we saw from the president goes further than we have heard previously from the administration when it comes to support for this theory it could have emerged from the lab accident. While the administration is saying that there is a low to moderate confidence that that is a likely scenario, that they do say one part of the intelligence community is leaning towards that being the explanation. Now, they go on to say, though, that two other parts of the intelligence community are leaning towards this theory that the virus emerged from human to animal contact. So no definitive conclusion, but this is the strongest statement we have seen from the administration yet, supporting at least the idea and the desire to find out more about whether or not this virus originated from that Wuhan lab.
Janice, I know you had that exclusive access inside the lab last summer. You spoke with officials there. What have they been saying, and what has China been saying about the origins of the virus?
Well, China's position hasn't really changed since we visited the lab last August. Back then, as expected, we had officials there tell us that nobody there had been sick with COVID. They denied that there had been any sort of leak or an accident. Here's the lab's director and what he told us.
I'm confident there's no need.
100%.
100%.
What has shifted slightly in China's position is the vehemency with which the government here believes that the investigation needs to be expanded to other countries, in particular the U.S. So it's now a matter of fighting the lab leak theory with the Fort Detrick theory and raising questions about U.S. transparency. I spoke today with a government advisor to ask him if the U.S. wanted to put investigators on the ground here tomorrow to come up with some answers for the benefit of the world. Would China be willing to do it? And his view was there has to be reciprocation, that China will not be willing to do such a thing unless the U.S. is willing to open up its labs and facilities to Chinese investigators and scientists. The issue now is whether the WHO is going to be allowed to have a team back here. They said at the end of their time here that there would be another phase of this investigation. From what we know, there are no talks right now to have that investigation resume here in China. So if there are these avenues of transmission to explore that might lead to some scientific evidence one way or the other, it's unlikely that those avenues are going to be explored here anytime soon.
Janice, the White House was asked whether they think China would cooperate with an American investigation. Here's what we heard, first of all, during yesterday's press briefing.
I'm not going to prejudge or, make any pre-announcements at this time. We're going to go with the 90-day investigation and see where it takes us from there. China has not been transparent. They need to do more. And so that's what we've been, I think, very vocal about these past several months, and we'll continue to do so.
So, Janice, has China responded to this yet?
Well, China was rather quick in its response to President Biden's statement. The Chinese embassy in Washington released a statement saying that, again, the U.S. is, quote, fixated on this lab theory. They call it lies. They believe that they have been fully transparent and that it's the U.S. that needs to open up its facilities to investigation. And that was repeated today by officials. All of it, throughout the last year, when we've been meeting with different scientists and different officials, we've asked the same question every time. If it meant putting the issue to the rest, would the Wuhan Institute of Virology open up its records to outside scrutiny? And we get the same answer every time, that they believe the lab has been transparent with the WHO, and that is their final answer.
And Shannon, quickly, is the White House saying anything about potential consequences for China if an investigation finds the virus did originate in a lab?
No, and I think that's one of the big questions here, too, that obviously scientifically and from a public health perspective, it is very important to know where this virus originated from. Diplomatically, geopolitically, what does this change if, let's say, the intelligence community gets to some high level of confidence, a definitive conclusion this came from the lab? What then is the response to that from the U.S., from the international community? And that is a question we just don't know the answer to yet.
Shannon and Janice, thank you both so much for your reporting this morning. Appreciate it.
Today could kick off the busiest weekend for airports since the pandemic began. AAA projects as many as 2.5 million people could take to the skies this weekend. That's a 577% increase compared to Memorial Day last year. The federal government is taking advantage of this surge, setting up vaccine sites in travel hubs. At Miami International Airport, flyers can get their shots before checking their bags. NBC News correspondent Shaquille Brewster joins us now from Miami International Airport. Shaq, good morning. So more than 100,000 travelers are expected every day at that airport this holiday weekend. Right. No surprise. I'm sure a lot of people want to hit the Miami beaches. Is this pop-up site ready to handle a lot of people? Are they expecting a lot of people to be interested in getting their shot right there?
Savannah, they say they are. They say that they can have, and they have 500 doses ready to go, but that can scale up very quickly with this federally supported vaccination site to about 3,000 doses. And I'll tell you, you come into Miami Airport, you can go downstairs, check your bag, walk upstairs, get that dose, and go on your plane. So if you give yourself a little bit of extra time, then you can come and get your vaccination. And that is exactly what healthcare experts are asking for during this time. They're saying this is a different part of the pandemic. This is a different part of the vaccination process where it's not about people flocking and rushing to get their vaccine. Instead, you have to kind of go to these people. You have to reach them where they are. And this weekend, this holiday weekend, when we know that this airport is expecting some of its busiest days since the start of the pandemic, you're going to have a lot of travelers, a lot of opportunity to vaccinate people. I spoke to an epidemiologist from the University of Florida about this exact thing, this push to meet people where they are. Listen to what she told me about why programs like this, vaccination clinics like this, are so important.
Now it's time for, public health to bring the vaccine to the people to make sure that that access is available for anyone who can't have it, who's too busy, who's working multiple jobs or doesn't have transportation, or also, again, to make sure that it's as convenient as possible for people who may hesitate.
Obviously, it's not just on the front end. If you just landed in Miami and you want to head off to the beach, but you want to get that one dose, you can come and get it. We just saw some people come in with their bags ready to go and get their vaccine. Of course, you wait 15 minutes after for that monitoring. But that's the point, getting people where they are. Right now, that's celebrating this Memorial Day weekend, Savannah.
Yeah, and you're right, going where they are. I mean, we've seen it here in New York at museums, in LA at public transit. Quickly, Shaq, though, even though we are all thrilled about this summer, the pandemic's not over. What are the rules we need to remember when traveling?
Pandemic not over, and that's something that Cindy emphasized. Still wear your mask. Masks are required on airport grounds. That's why I have mine on right now. When you get on the plane, that mask must stay on. There's even announcements as part of the security procedures. Doctors are still emphasizing practice that social distancing, continue to hand wash. You're still encountering a lot of people. There will be a lot of crowds. So despite those pre-pandemic crowds, still practice those pandemic safety measures.
All right, Shaq, hope you get to enjoy Miami a little bit while on assignment. Thanks so much.
You got it.
First responders in one city are now using drones to help them access emergencies.
But do they need a warrant to record? We'll walk you through some of the privacy concerns next. In a tribute to the late actor Chadwick Boseman, his former school, Howard University, is renaming its College of Fine Arts after him. Boseman graduated from Howard back in 2000 with a Bachelor of Arts degree in directing. Shortly after his death last August, students at Howard started a petition to rename the school after the beloved actor. What an excellent tribute for him, and how cool for those students to now be able to say that they went to the Chadwick Boseman school.
Yeah. Oh, I love that they did that. And you're so right. I bet they're excited about that to be able to go there. Thanks, Joe. Crime rates are rising in Los Angeles County, putting fresh scrutiny on the city's criminal reform system. NBC Nightly News anchor Lester Holt sat down with the DA to look to the future of Los Angeles.
Savannah and Joe, a progressive approach to criminal justice reform here in Los Angeles is being watched carefully. A new district attorney, not quite 6 months on the job, has instituted big changes aimed at putting fewer people behind bars, fighting for change while also fighting to keep his job. Like many major metropolitan areas, crime has taken on some unsettling trends in Los Angeles County. Murder up 45% since 2019 and shootings 47%. But how the county's new district attorney is responding is driving a very public wedge between himself and some of his own prosecutors.
At some point, there are some people that are not going to be willing to evolve.
Evolving for George Gascon means locking up fewer people. First, by eliminating cash bail before trial, which he says disproportionately keeps the poor and minorities behind bars, and limiting traditional prosecutorial tools like enhancements, circumstances like being associated with a gang or using a gun that can add years to sentences. What were your priorities taking this office?
How do we reimagine the way that we bring security and safety and public health to our community, where you can have just enough intervention to create the safety of the moment and ensure that we have safety in the future and not over-incarcerate.
Traditional tough-on-crime measures like California's decades-old 3 strikes law have become a tougher sell in cities across America, and progressive DAs have been swept into office, riding a wave of criminal justice reform. For Gascon in L.A., the backlash has been especially swift. Some veteran prosecutors in Gascon's office, like John McKinney, are calling his changes misguided, even illegal. You've been outspoken in your criticism of your boss.
He implemented a slew of blanket policies that don't leave room for any exercise of discretion.
And what about these enhancements, adding on years because there was a firearm used, because there's a gang affiliation?
It's the legislature's way of saying, a person who does a strong arm robbery, just a push and grab, shouldn't be subject to the same penalty as someone who shoots the victim with a gun.
And it's not just insiders attacking him. When Gascon said he'd stop sending prosecutors to parole hearings, L.A. sheriff said he'd send his staff to stand up for crime victims. There's already a recall movement against you, supported by families of murder victims who fear that the killers are not going to be adequately punished.
I started a victims advisory board, and they, by the way, as the national polls and even in LA County recent poll tells us, they have sort of made a transition from the I from right to one of, I want the system to deal with my trauma, I want the offender to be held accountable, but I want some rehabilitation because I want to avoid recidivism.
Gascon has earned allies as well. Tim Cornegay, now a criminal justice advocate, spent decades in prison on a robbery conviction under the 3 strikes law.
I feel like George is one who engages in transformation because the system needs to be transformed. You can't just fix the broken parts because there's a culture of you lock them up and throw away the key.
In a small town outside San Diego, drones are helping police get their eyes on a scene quickly, much faster than it takes for first responders to physically get there. It's the first program of its kind authorized by the FAA. Police say the drones are reducing response times and increasing safety, but some residents worry they're being surveilled without a warrant. NBC News Now correspondent Simone Boyce reports.
This is what the future of policing sounds like.
Like a buzzing sound. It's not as loud as a helicopter. I'm trying not to normalize this as I could try not to make this as the new normal in our existence here.
Chula Vista is a quiet community on the outskirts of San Diego, but some residents fear a far-reaching police drone program is disturbing the peace.
It's certainly uncomfortable to have basically a cop looking into your yard.
It was a report of something on fire in the street, and we had multiple 911 calls. But
here's what the cops see.
So we're trying to figure out where it was.
This is the nucleus of the drone operation here at the Chula Vista Police Department, the first in the nation to get FAA clearance to surveil an entire city.
The drone program is made up of really two people. So it's made up of a teleoperator, which is a police officer inside the police department, who's listening to incoming 911 calls. He's listening to the police dispatch. And then you have a pilot in command, which is on the rooftop where the drone is located. Our drone is getting on scene within 3 minutes of the call that is entered, as opposed to over 6 minutes before an officer gets on scene. So they're getting there a lot quicker.
There are 4 drones ready to deploy from strategic locations around the city, all entitled to cruise every inch of airspace within these 52 square miles. Police Captain Don Redmond says the department received the green light to explore the use of drones as first responders during the Trump administration. That was in 2018. Since then, calls for accountability have grown even louder.
We heard the national message that things need to be done differently. So we looked at technology to try and give us an edge to be able to respond and de-escalate situations.
Redmond says this surveillance already leads to fewer interactions between citizens and police. 25% of the time they launch a drone, they don't even send officers on foot. But when they are working together, Redmond says an eye in the sky gives the ones on the ground a preview of what to expect.
There's a couple times we've seen them just kind of like for 5 minutes or so.
But what about the civilians who aren't police targets and still feel like they're being recorded?
So I see them almost daily.
The view from 300 to 400 feet above isn't all that clear. But once the drones descend, privacy concerns come into focus for residents like Norel.
I know that it's a cop in the vicinity. And looking over and into my property when I'm not doing anything wrong and there's no warrant.
The department needs a warrant to record anywhere residents have a, quote, reasonable expectation of privacy, like their own yard or inside a building. But if a drone observes a crime in progress, police can legally pursue it.
Wherever we go, when we step out of our homes, right, that we're constantly going to be surveilled or our camera is going to take a picture of us.
How would you feel if you or your family members were caught in the flight path of one of these drones? Would that make you uncomfortable at all?
It wouldn't, and I only say that because I know helicopters fly over my house all the time.
But new questions emerge after the drones are out of sight.
These drones collect lots of data all the time.
Lily Irani researches this issue as a professor at the University of San Diego.
The police department stores the data. That data can be then shared with other agencies, and that way is absolutely different than helicopters.
The Chula Vista PD says they don't routinely share their drone footage with other agencies, except the local fire department. The public can see flight logs, why the drones were launched, and when, everything except the footage itself.
How transparent is it if you're not willing to readily release the footage to the public?
So the footage is much like a body-worn camera. And at the end of the day, that is downloaded into a secured evidence database, and then it is purged according to our purge guidelines.
3 cities across the country are launching similar drone programs, and they're looking to this sleepy Southern California town for inspiration. Meanwhile, the communities caught in the crosshairs of this technology are watching too, and weighing the cost of this brave new world of policing.
Millions of Americans are fully vaccinated, but some are still hesitant to take off their masks.
Is the emotional upheaval from the past year that's behind it? That's next.
Time for a CNBC Money Minute, the biggest financial headlines of the day and why they matter to you.
Frank Holland is with us today. Hi, Frank. Good to see you.
Hey, good morning. Great to see you both as always. While an activist investor wins at least 2 seats on ExxonMobil's board, pushing for a new vision for the oil giant's strategy related to climate change, the hedge fund owns a very small percentage of Exxon's shares, but reportedly got the backing of the company's second largest shareholder, financial company BlackRock. Shareholders are getting louder and demanding publicly traded companies address global warming. This year alone, 25 climate-related proposals have made it on the ballots, receiving an average of about 60% support. Jeff Bezos will step down as Amazon CEO on July 5th. That's 27 years to the day after he founded the company in his garage. Bezos revealing his departure date at Amazon's annual shareholder meeting. He had announced this spring that Andy Jassy, the head of Amazon Web Services, will replace him as CEO. Bezos will remain the chairman of the board. And Disney's California theme parks and resorts will welcome non-California residents starting on June 15th. Guests will be required to wear their face coverings during their visit to Disneyland, regardless of their vaccination status. Disneyland and California Adventure reopened for state residents on April 30th after being closed for more than a year. Theme parks in the state are still required to stay at 25% capacity. Back over to you.
All right. A lot of kids looking forward to summer vacation. That's good news for them, I bet.
Yeah, really. Good news for me. I'd like to go.
and adults, too. Thank you, Frank. Americans are getting a glimpse at what a post-pandemic world could look like. Millions are vaccinated and restrictions are lifting.
But for some, the past year of lockdowns and widespread death still weighs heavy on them. Now The Atlantic is taking a closer look at the trauma millions of Americans experienced in the pandemic, all while massive social protests and the election played out. The piece is called What Happens When Americans Can Finally Exhale. Author Ed Yong writes, the COVID-19 pandemic has been a singular disaster, a recurring series of traumatic events that have eroded the very social trust and connections that allow communities to recover from catastrophes. Let's bring in Ed Yong now, staff writer at The Atlantic and author of that piece. Ed, thank you for joining us this morning. It was a tough article in a lot of ways, but about such an important topic. And one of the things I first want to ask you about is what I just mentioned, which is just this idea that there's been this breakdown in community relationships during the pandemic. We can't physically be together. What effect does losing that bond with your neighbors, with your community, going to your local restaurants, bodegas, what effect does that have?
I think it's really significant. We know from studies of trauma in other disasters that communities can actually weather a lot, but they tend to be better at resisting the effects of trauma if they have more solidarity, if they have a sense of belonging, and if they have trust in authorities. And obviously, the COVID-19 pandemic has eroded all three of those things to a significant degree in the US. It has shown the degree to which institutions and governments have failed us, and it has isolated people from each other and from their communities. And I think that's what I mean when I say that it is almost a self-reinforcing disaster. It makes recovery from itself more difficult.
Ed, there's this conversation among mental health experts on what constitutes trauma. Your piece explores the difference between lowercase t and capital T trauma. You write, even Americans who were spared the big T traumas of the emergency room still experienced a year of fear, uncertainty, and disruption. They, too, might experience jarring moments of unexpected reflection, even as the national outlook begins to brighten. Can you tell us a little more about what this means?
We've all experienced so much uncertainty over the last year as we struggle to make sense of this new unfolding, uprooting crisis that has affected so much of our lives. And all of those little stresses add up. They may, for some people, be unemployment, insecurity, sickness, death, loss of loved ones. All of these things, you can sort of get by them when you're running on adrenaline, but it's often the case that when people get a chance to slow down, when they finally exhale, they really start taking stock of everything that's happened to them. And it's often then, unexpectedly, that people collapse or find it really difficult. A lot of the experts I know who study trauma and help communities get over traumas say that these moments of calm can be really quite punishing for people, especially because they don't expect it. You expect to be joyful.
Absolutely. I had never heard of that lowercase t, capital T trauma. That really resonated with me because it's like no matter what type of way you experience something negative this year, it could affect you. And for some people, it's going to be a little bit harder, I think, to go back to normal. And your piece talks about people that will be hesitant in that way with a world of no masks and no worries about getting your loved ones sick. You wrote that for some people, taking off a mask will mean just exposing the bottom half of their face. But for others, it signifies that they must reevaluate their understanding of risk and danger yet again with fewer emotional reserves at hand. Talk us through this about for those people that it is going to be tough and what's going to hold them back from being able to go back to life like it's 2019.
Yeah, cast your mind a year ago. So many of the things that we rely upon in public spaces, hugs, offices, all of these things suddenly became dangerous. So we had to update our sense of the world, like how to live in the world and engage with other people. And we are having to do that again now that things are feeling a little safer. And it's not that people, I think, are going to immediately bounce back to 2019. They need to do that exercise again of remaking their sense of the world. And that's difficult after we've already experienced 14 months of stress and anxiety. And obviously, like, some people will be fine. They'll be totally happy and great for them. But a lot of people will be disproportionately hit by this pandemic and all the other stresses that you mentioned. The protests, the killing of Black Americans, the insurrection and the election cycle. Like, a lot of marginalized communities in this country, poor people and people of color, were significantly hit by the pandemic, more likely to be grieving people now, and maybe struggling more often to get back on track, and even as the world becomes a little safer.
All right, Ed Yong, thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, important stuff.
Thanks for having me.
Yes. Coming up, getting a seat on a plane is getting more expensive as the country reopens.
2 new low-cost airlines are looking to change that next. Millions of Americans are eager to travel again. I know we are. And this morning, there's more options.
2 new low-cost airlines, one on each coast, will eventually connect dozens of mid-sized cities across the country. They're the first new airlines to launch in 14 years. NBC's Tom Costello joins us with more. Hey, Tom.
Yeah, hey, really an interesting time to start up an airline, right, guys? I mean, the airline industry has been decimated by the pandemic. These 2 startups, they sat out the pandemic, but they're now betting the time is right to do this. So Breeze Airlines, first flight today up the East Coast. Avelo out west, it's already flying. Just as the pandemic cloud is lifting, 2 new airlines are taking flight. Breeze Airways launching its first flights up the East Coast today. On the West Coast, Avelo Airlines has been flying for a month already. The first new carriers to launch since 2007. With demand for leisure travel on the rebound, these new startups are betting that offering low fares to connect people to mid-sized cities where many major airlines have cut service will pay off.
Most important part of the day.
23 years ago, David Nealman started JetBlue Airways. Now he's starting Breeze, betting he can offer something the big airlines can't.
95% of our routes are in routes that have no nonstop competition. I think there's just hundreds of markets that we can serve that really don't make sense for some of these other guys.
Breeze is starting with just 4 cities, Tampa, Charleston, South Carolina, New Orleans, and Norfolk, Virginia, but expanding to 16 cities by late July, including Louisville, Columbus, and Pittsburgh. They've got a catchy slogan, too.
It's going to be a breeze to fly.
One-way tickets starting now as low as $39, though like other budget airlines, luggage and seat assignments will cost more, but no change or cancellation fees. Meanwhile, Avelo Airlines launched last month, just ahead of the summer surge.
It's a peak season, so we're getting everything up and running in time to take advantage of that.
Operating out of Burbank Airport in Los Angeles, Avelo is now flying 11 routes across the West, also to second-tier airports, including Boseman, Phoenix Mesa, and Pasco, Washington. Introductory ticket fares starting at $19.
We always look for deals, and this is like the best deal ever.
With plans to add an East Coast base in New Haven, Connecticut later this year, smaller cities that make a big difference to passengers.
It's a direct flight from where I live to here, so I could see family easier than I haven't been able to be here for 21 years.
CEO Andrew Levy started Allegiant Airlines and says he's now targeting average Americans.
We're not going after business customers. We don't have lots of frequency. We don't have frequent flyer plans. The vast majority of people care about getting from point A to point B safely, reliably, and at a great low price.
Back on the East Coast, Breeze is also focusing on those smaller cities.
Some don't have flights at all, and some only have flights going to hubs. So it's going to bring a lot of excitement.
So while the airline CEOs have a lot of experience, they insist that they're only hiring pilots with a lot of experience as well. So Avelo says its first class of pilots, the typical experience was 10,000 hours. It's pretty good. Breeze is saying its first captain came from American. Its chief safety officer came from United and Delta. So experience in the front office, they insist, and also in the front of the plane. Guys, back to you.
All right. Tom Costello, thanks so much.
Hey, NBC News viewers, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.